Hey guys, welcome to part 2 of my Bullet 500 restoration. In this one, I'm taking off the carburetor, air filter housing, aluminum head, and iron barrel. And at the end, I'll check the condition of the crankshaft, so fingers crossed. But before we start, let's take a look at a couple things I'm removing permanently. So this is a decompression valve, which I find completely unnecessary for this bike. And it comes around, you control it with this lever right here. What it does is it releases pressure from the top end, and it's the only bike I've ever owned that had one. It does have some legit uses, but none of it applies to me. For starters, it can be used to get the piston to top dead center, but that only works with an older point system, and this bike was upgraded to an electronic ignition at some point in its life. So this ammeter will basically show the position of the points, which in turn shows the position of the piston. And when everything's set right, using the decompression valve will put the piston at top dead center. Some people use this to help kickstart the bike, but I've always kickstarted bikes by feel. However, having the piston at top dead center is important to adjusting the valves, so it does make sense for that purpose. There are other ways to find top dead center though, and it again does not work with an electronic ignition. There are a couple other uses for it. Some people will kill the engine with the decompression valve to prevent any kickback from the crankshaft that can literally break the sprag clutch. That's basically a gear system between the crank and starter motor, and it's notoriously fragile. Just about all of them break at some point. I'm removing the starter anyway, and this will be a kickstart only bike. Also, if you do any kind of trials riding or racing, it can be used to slow the bike on steep hills, basically like engine braking. None of this applies to me, so this is what I think of the decompression valve. So long cable. All right, let's get this lever off of here real quick. I've got a nice stainless steel plug that'll go right there in its place. So the next thing to go is this air filter housing. I'm just not a fan of it. So I'm getting an external S&B filter for this mic carb, and this thing's gonna go. So before I start taking stuff off, let's identify a couple of weird things on this bike. So you've got the air filter housing, this is the carburetor, and then that's the flange that holds it onto the head. But then what is this line coming off the flange that goes through the bike? Well, let's take a look at that. So the line comes off the flange, kind of goes through the bike and ends up inside of this side box. Now what it's supposed to do is hook into a pulse air valve, which will then push that into the top of the header pipe. I'll put a diagram up so you can see what I'm talking about. So you can see it coming off the flange and into the pulse air valve, and then going out to the top of the header pipe. And what's supposed to happen, it's almost like an afterburner where the gases go in there and burn and get even hotter than it would be. And that's supposed to burn off the gas before it comes out of the muffler, making it cleaner overall. There's only one problem. There's no pulse air valve here, and that tube just dead ends right here at the bottom of this housing. So it's just venting into this box and doing nothing. So what I'm going to do is I'm either going to leave this hose and let it vent in the box, I guess no harm, no foul, or once I get this flange off of here, I'll take a good look at it, maybe just plug this hole and be done with this whole thing. There's also another environmental hack with this air box. Let's go around the other side of the bike and I'll show you. So this is an oil catch can or a breather box. And you see it has some hoses. You've got oil kind of coming and going from the oil pan into the timing cover. But the problem with this is you also have a line right there that's blowing gas fumes and sometimes even oil into the back of the air filter housing. And that is not going to work once I remove it. So I'm just going to reroute that line to the ground. But I assure you I'm going to do this in a sensitive, environmentally friendly manner. So the first thing I'm going to do is loosen these hose clamps that are big enough to go around the tire. You got to love the previous owners. So now I need to loosen two bolts. This one and that one, so I can slide out the airbox. So there's the tube from the oil catch can. So I have to remove the throttle cable from the top of the carburetor. As you can see, it's just wrapped in tape instead of a proper rubber boot. So there's the cable right there. It's just a matter of getting this unhooked. Sorry, I had to unhook this off camera. I just needed both hands. I couldn't really get a camera in here, but it was just a matter of pushing this spring up. So then you can get that little plate out right there. And then I'll just take it out. And then the cable just goes through that groove and comes right out. So on this side, I just need to loosen these two clamps and then the carburetor will pull right off. There it goes. So now I just have to remove these two screws and then take off the flange. And there you go. Real quick, I'm just going to take out the bracket that held on the air filter box. Just that one bolt right there. Everything in containers. All right, let's tear this engine out. So the first thing I have to do is remove this bracket that's hooked onto the top end right there and into the frame. This is also where the back of the gas tank goes. There was a nut in the back. Now I'm going to remove the spark plug. Now I have to take off this external oil line, what I like to call the straw. So there's one bolt down here, and then two on the side, there and there. And it comes right off. I have a new one of these that I'm going to be installing, but I'm keeping this old one to use as a template so I can bend the new one approximately in the right shape. So you want the piston to be at top dead center before you remove the aluminum head. And the way I did that is I just took a straw and just put it right through the hole where the spark plug goes, and I found top dead center that way. This is the highest point of the straw. And you just do that by turning the Kickstarter slowly and the piston will go up and down until you find that highest point. Then you know you're at top dead center. So at this point, when I start breaking an engine down, I like to label things. Even though I know where a lot of this stuff goes, it's just a good idea just to be sure in case stuff gets shuffled around, that kind of thing. So I put E for exhaust, I for intake. And it always points toward the exhaust side, or the right side of the bike. I couldn't get a socket wrench in this last one, so I'm just using a regular wrench. Once everything's loosened and the bolts are taken out, it might be easy, it might be hard to get them out. Let's take a look. All right, this one was easy. It was already loose. It's tight, but you just work it, it'll come out. Sometimes it needs a little gentle persuasion. Rubber mallet only. And the exhaust side. Okay, so you have your two bearings there and there. You have 4 bolts within the head, 2 and 4. Then you have this one and this one, and then the head will come off. Really quick, I just want to get this decompression valve off of here. Gone forever. And then they should lift right off. The top came off, the bottom is still a little bit jammed in here. Before I keep playing with that, I'm going to take the push rods out. They just lift right off. So keep track of which one comes out of where, because one is longer than the other. So gentle persuasion works. Finally. Now let's get these first 4 bolts off. Now for the last 2, and hopefully this rusty nut doesn't give me any problems. No problem at all. Okay, so I broke a fin on the iron barrel. The good news is I'm replacing this anyway, but it was absolutely fused to the head. It was very hard to get off. I was kind of pounding it for a while with the rubber mallet, and you got to be careful with these fins. I wasn't really worried about it because I know I'm replacing this, but they do break easily, so just be careful if you're planning on keeping what you've got. Just a little carbon buildup there. So I'm honestly not looking forward to this next part because I don't know how hard it's going to be to get this barrel off. But there's only one bolt left. It's right there. These studs in the head were holding everything else on. So let's take that off and see how hard this is. All right, sorry. So I was pulling on this a little bit off camera. I wasn't expecting this to be easy. And it actually slid right up. So you can see there's a cylinder right there. I'm just going to grab some rags so I can put it under that after I pull this off, just so nothing gets down on the crankcase. But this was surprisingly easy to take off. Just a little wrestling to get that thing off. Well, I don't know. I got to look at this a little bit more, but it looks like my worst fears are realized. I think this crankshaft is done. If you can hear this, there's a lot of play in that bearing. Yeah, this thing is done. So that means I'm going to have to crack open the crankcase and replace all the bearings once I get in there, and then unfortunately, I'm going to have to replace the crankshaft. Yeah, it's really bad. All right, so I'll show you how to get the piston off. It's just, there's a little clip right here. And always put something, always cover up the crankcase. You do not want to drop this clip down there. So this is interesting. This clip is broken. You can see there's one end right there on the right, and then the other end is just sitting right there inside the piston. Very interesting. Look at that. Crazy. All right, sorry, I was messing with it off camera, but I was able to pull it out. It wasn't easy, but here it is. All right, so now I just have to take this pin out that's holding it to the rod. And some people just bang this out with a hammer, but don't do that because you can damage a crankshaft. Now, in my case, it doesn't really matter, but use a proper extraction tool. I'll show you how to do that. So this extraction tool is very easy to use. It's almost like using a corkscrew. Just that goes on one end of the piston and that bushing goes on the pin and just pulls it right out. So just push the tool through one end of the piston and screw the other end on. And just like a corkscrew, just unscrew it. And once you feel it come off the rod, just lift it off. Yeah, this crankshaft is just wasted. So much movement there. The bearing is gone. Well, so much for having an ear for rod knocking. Although in my defense, I had 3 other people listen to it, and they didn't think it was a crankshaft either. And they know a lot about vintage bikes. Anyway, it's actually a really good thing that the crankshaft is bad, and for a few reasons. I mean, in hindsight, it would have been kind of foolish to put a new top end on an old Indian crankshaft, even if it was solid. That's just asking for trouble. And I can now show you guys a total engine overhaul, not just the top end. So this video series will be complete. So what I'm going to do is I'm getting a brand new European crankshaft that's designed specifically for this bike. And both quality and durability are like 1,000 times better than the stock Indian one. So this wraps up part 2. I'll be taking off the timing cover in part 3 and replace the oil pumps and spindle. If the case is in decent shape, I'll probably go ahead and just keep it and lap the oil pumps. I'll show you how to do that. It's basically like breaking it in, kind of like new piston rings mating with the cylinder wall. I'll also remove all of the timing gears and get the right side ready to split the crankcase open. And coming up, I'll open the primary cover, remove the clutch, primary chain, and alternator so I can remove the inner case. Once that's out, I'll remove the starter and sprag clutch and then plug the case where the starter was. I'll also change the sprockets and chain, as you can only access the front sprocket by removing this entire case. So I'll get the best set I can find so I don't have to deal with this for a long time. I'll be installing a new alternator, clutch, and primary chain, so everything's going to be replaced. But that's after I drop the bottom end out, open the crankcase, and replace the crankshaft and bearings. And I'm going to be working on this a lot, so I don't anticipate it taking too long. I'll have new restoration videos at least every week, and I can't wait to get this back on the road. So, thanks again for watching, and if you're new, definitely subscribe and stick around. Hey, so the dog told me you were laughing about the crankshaft, saying that your bike was so perfect, had a perfect crankshaft. That attitude's not going to get you more treats. You do have a cool bike, though. I'll give you that.